He called her dead weight just before Christmas, a casual dismissal delivered with the familiarity only a son could wield. The words, sharper than any blade, were spoken in the quiet kitchen of her home in Cary, North Carolina, just off High House Road, where she had spent 25 years raising him. She was standing by the polished granite counter, a half-empty mug of cooling tea in her hand, when Mark had just walked through, phone already pressed to his ear, oblivious, or perhaps uncaring, that she was even there. The low rumble of his voice had carried, even through the speaker of his phone. "Can't move, man. Mom's dead weight. Holding me back." He hadn't even glanced her way. He'd just kept walking, out the back door, the screen door slapping shut behind him. The ceramic mug felt suddenly too heavy, its warmth fading into a chill. She didn't drop it, but her grip tightened, knuckles white. The phrase echoed, "Dead weight?" If any part of this story resonates with your own experiences, I'd be grateful to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Eleanor stood motionless, the scent of morning coffee still lingering, but now it felt tainted. She had given up her career as a legal assistant years ago, when Mark was small, to be present, to nurture. Her husband, David, had supported the decision, always telling her that her presence was the true foundation of their home. After David passed, 5 years prior, it had been just her and Mark in this house. He was 28 now, working a part-time job, ostensibly saving for an apartment, but mostly, it seemed, saving for new video games and concert tickets. His car, still under her insurance, was perpetually parked askew in the driveway. She funded the groceries, the utilities, even his phone bill, all under the unspoken agreement that he would soon be self-sufficient. Dead weight. The term implied she was a burden, a hindrance to his progress, something to be discarded. The irony was a cold, bitter taste. She was the anchor, the engine, the silent force that kept his fragile existence afloat. The following days were a blur of forced pleasantries. Mark was home more than usual, ostensibly due to the holiday season, but primarily because he hadn't secured enough hours at his retail job. He moved through the house like a phantom, leaving trails of crumbs and discarded clothes. He was oblivious to the shift in her, or pretended to be. Eleanor observed him with new, clinical eyes. She watched him sprawl on the sofa, remote in hand, flicking through streaming services, the soft glow of the television illuminating his face. He seemed to consume everything without thought, without appreciation. He used her car, ate her food, and lived under her roof, all while considering her an impediment. The betrayal stung, a constant, dull ache beneath her ribs. It wasn't the first time he'd dismissed her, but it was the most explicit. Other times it had been a forgotten birthday, a missed dinner, a casual shrug when she asked for help with the garden. Those were small wounds, easily bandaged with maternal hope. This was a direct assault on her very being. She remembered the conversations with David, late at night, about Mark's future. David had been the pragmatic one, urging Mark towards independence, setting firm boundaries. She had been softer, perhaps too soft, always finding an excuse for his youthful exuberance, his perceived struggles. "He'll get there, David," she'd said. "He just needs a little more time." David had just smiled, a knowing, weary smile. Now that smile felt like a condemnation of her own choices. The house, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, albeit a comfortable one, built of her own making. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of a neighbor's lawnmower, all felt amplified, each sound a reminder of her solitary existence. She began to avoid Mark, retreating to her bedroom, finding solace in old photo albums, pages filled with a boy who once looked at her with adoration, not disdain. The past felt like a different country, one she could never return to. The idea of cutting the cord, specifically on his Netflix, had not come to her immediately. It formed slowly, like a dark cloud gathering on the horizon. First, it was just a fleeting thought, a petty impulse. Then, it gained substance, becoming a quiet, simmering resolve. She had noticed the Netflix icon glowing on the smart TV. In the living room, always logged into her account, always streaming something for Mark. He used it incessantly. It was a minor expense, but it was her expense. It was a symbol of her continued provision, a tangible piece of her support that he had now deemed dead weight. The thought twisted in her gut. She had paid for his college tuition, or at least a significant portion before he decided it wasn't for him. She had paid for his car repairs, his dental work, countless takeout meals. She had even bought him a new gaming console just last Christmas, thinking it would lift his spirits, and this was her reward. The days leading up to the final decision were marked by an almost surgical detachment. Eleanor found herself observing Mark's habits, mentally cataloging his dependencies. He rarely cooked, relying on her prepared meals, or ordering delivery, using her credit card linked to his food apps. He rarely cleaned, leaving socks in the living room, empty snack wrappers on the coffee table. He spent hours in his room, the faint glow of his computer screen visible under his door, or in the living room, immersed in his shows. Netflix in particular was a constant. She'd walk by and see him entranced, sometimes with headphones on, sometimes just the quiet murmur of dialogue filling the room. He didn't ask her about her day. He didn't offer to help with chores. He just existed, a passive recipient of her endless efforts. The quiet domestic details, once comforting, now felt like evidence, each discarded item a testament to his disregard. Her heart hardened a fraction more with each observation. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the principle, the blatant disrespect, the absolute lack of recognition for her contribution. She wanted to sever the cord of his comfort, just as he had severed the cord of her worth. The actual execution of the plan felt almost anticlimactic in its simplicity. Eleanor waited until Mark was out of the house, ostensibly at the gym, though she suspected he was at a friend's house as he often was when he wanted to avoid chores. The house was silent, save for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall. She walked to her desk, a heavy oak piece that had been David's, and pulled out her laptop. Her fingers, usually steady, trembled slightly as she navigated to the Netflix website. Her profile was already logged in, a familiar banner across the screen, showing continue watching for a show Mark had started. She clicked on her account settings, then cancel membership. The page asked for a reason. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the options. Cost. Not enough time to watch. None of them felt right. There was no option for my son called me dead weight. She selected other, typed nothing, and confirmed the cancellation. A brief, almost imperceptible surge of something akin to victory. Then a profound emptiness. It was done. The digital cord, invisible yet so tangible in its implications, was cut. The subscription would run until the end of the current billing cycle, a quiet countdown ticking away in the background. She sat for a moment staring at the screen, the Netflix logo now replaced by a message confirming her cancellation. The quiet felt different now, no longer just empty, but charged with a decision. It was a small act, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of their lives. Yet it felt monumental to her. It was the first time she had actively, definitively withheld something from him that he had taken for granted. For years she had been the giver, the provider, the silent supporter. Now, she was the one pulling back, establishing a boundary where none had existed before. She thought of all the times she had overlooked his casual disrespect, his forgotten promises, his easy assumption that she would always be there to clean up his messes, financial or otherwise. The memories cascaded, each one a small invisible wound. The time he borrowed money for a car repair and never paid it back. The time he left for a weekend trip without telling her, leaving her to worry. The time he promised to help her paint the living room and never showed up. All these moments, small in isolation, coalesced into a heavy weight, a burden she had carried alone. The cancellation was not an act of revenge. She told herself, not entirely. It was an act of quiet self-preservation. It was the first step towards reclaiming her own space, her own worth. The waiting felt longer than the act itself. She knew the cancellation wouldn't be immediate, and Mark wouldn't discover it for a few days, perhaps even a week. The quiet anticipation was a strange companion. She observed him, still oblivious, still sprawled on the couch, still lost in his digital world. She felt a grim satisfaction, a quiet power. This was a small battle, she knew, but it was her battle. She thought about other things she had done for him, other chords that needed severing. The phone bill, perhaps. The car insurance. Her mind, once so focused on his comfort, now began to turn inward, examining her own needs, her own suppressed desires. She hadn't bought herself new clothes in years, always prioritizing his needs, always finding excuses for his expenses. Her garden, once a source of joy, had become overgrown, a silent testament to her neglect of self. She had poured so much of herself into Mark, into the idea of him, that she had forgotten who Eleanor was. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, usually a background noise, now felt like a question, demanding an answer. Who was she? Apart from being Mark's mother, the answer was not immediate, but the question itself felt like a release. The weekend passed with an unsettling calm. Mark spent most of his time holed up in his room or out with friends. He still appeared for meals, still expected her to clean up after him. Each time she saw him, a knot tightened in her stomach, anticipating the inevitable confrontation. She rehearsed what she would say, how she would remain calm, direct, and unyielding. She wouldn't explain, wouldn't justify. She would simply state the fact of her decision. The power imbalance had shifted, subtly, imperceptibly, in her favor. She thought about the money she would save, not just from Netflix, but from all the other things she subsidized. It wasn't a king's ransom, but it was enough to start rebuilding something for herself. Perhaps a trip she had always wanted to take. Perhaps a small renovation for her own enjoyment. Or simply, the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had control over her own resources. The house felt lighter, less suffocating. Even though nothing external had changed, it was an internal shift, a bracing for the coming storm. She went to bed each night with a sense of quiet determination. No longer just a mother, but a woman reclaiming her autonomy. The moment came on a Tuesday evening. Eleanor was in the kitchen meticulously folding laundry, the scent of fresh fabric softener filling the air. Mark walked in, phone in hand, face creased with annoyance. "Mom, something's wrong with the Netflix. It keeps saying your membership has ended." He looked at her, confused, as if she were a technician he had summoned. He wasn't angry yet, just bewildered, as if a basic utility had suddenly ceased to function. "It seems your membership has ended, Mark," she replied, her voice steady, even. She didn't look up from folding a shirt, deliberately keeping her gaze on the soft cotton. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with unspoken accusation. He cleared his throat, his bewilderment slowly shifting to indignation. "What do you mean, my membership? It's your account. Did you forget to pay the bill?" His tone held the familiar dismissiveness, the assumption of her incompetence. This was the moment. This was the confrontation. "No, Mark, I didn't forget to pay the bill," she said, finally looking up, meeting his eyes directly. Her gaze was calm, unwavering. "I canceled it." His jaw dropped slightly, and he closed it with a snap. "You canceled it? Why would you do that? I was in the middle of a series." His voice had risen, the confusion giving way to anger. The casual cruelty of his previous comment echoed in her mind. Dead weight. She took a deep breath, the scent of fabric softener suddenly cloying. "I canceled it because it's an expense I no longer wish to cover for you." She watched his face contort, a mix of disbelief and outrage. He had never been denied something he perceived as his right. He was like a child whose favorite toy had been snatched away. "But I use it all the time. What am I supposed to do now?" His voice was petulant, devoid of any genuine concern for her. She folded the last shirt, placing it neatly in the basket. "That, Mark, is for you to figure out." The simplicity of her answer seemed to infuriate him further. The quiet strength in her voice was new, unfamiliar to him. He was seeing a version of his mother he had never encountered before. He slammed his phone down on the counter, making the ceramic bowl of fruit jump. "Are you serious? This is ridiculous." What? Are you trying to punish me or something? He gestured wildly, his hand sweeping across the kitchen, encompassing their shared space. The sudden fury in his eyes was familiar, a storm she had always weathered, always appeased. Not this time. I'm not punishing you, Mark. I'm simply exercising my right to manage my own finances and my own household. You referred to me as dead weight just last week. Dead weight doesn't pay for entertainment. Dead weight doesn't provide endless resources. Her voice was still quiet, almost a whisper, but each word landed with precision, leaving no room for argument or denial. He recoiled, his face paling slightly, the recognition of his own words hitting him. He hadn't thought she'd heard. He hadn't thought it mattered. His anger momentarily deflated, replaced by a stunned silence. The power dynamic had shifted, irrevocably. She had used his own words, his own careless dismissal, as the foundation of her decision. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The usual bluster was gone. He looked around the kitchen, as if seeing it for the first time, not as his home, but as her domain. The fruit bowl, the clean counters, the neatly folded laundry, all tangible proof of her unseen labor. That was just a figure of speech, he mumbled, his gaze darting away. I didn't mean it like that. The flimsy excuse hung in the air, pathetic and unconvincing. Eleanor simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. There was no softening in her eyes, no sign of forgiveness. Words have meaning, Mark. Actions have consequences. Her voice was steady, calm, devoid of any emotional flourish. He stood there, shoulders slumped, defeated. He wasn't used to this. He was used to her sighs, her mild rebukes, followed by eventual capitulation. This was different. This was cold. This was final. He mumbled something about going to a friend's house, snatched his phone and stormed out, the screen door slapping shut once more, but this time it felt like a door closing on a chapter, not just a room. The silence that followed his departure was profound, almost sacred. Eleanor stood by the counter, the scent of clean laundry still in the air, a faint tremor running through her hands. Her heart pounded, a drumbeat of quiet victory. She had done it. She had faced him, laid bare his casual cruelty, and stood her ground. It wasn't the dramatic explosion she might have imagined, but a quiet, firm assertion of self. The satisfaction was not a joyous burst, but a deep, settled peace. She knew this was only the beginning. This wasn't just about Netflix. It was about every unspoken expectation, every unappreciated sacrifice. The conversation had cracked open the door to a larger reckoning. She walked to the living room, a strange sense of lightness in her steps. The television screen was dark, the Netflix icon no longer present on the main menu. A small, almost imperceptible detail, yet it marked a profound change. She sat on the sofa, not in front of the TV but facing the window, watching the last sliver of twilight fade from the sky. The house felt like her own again, imbued with her quiet sovereignty. She had reclaimed her space, and more importantly, a piece of herself. The days that followed were tense. Mark returned home, but the atmosphere between them was arctic. He avoided her gaze, ate his meals quickly, and spent most of his time in his room, or out of the house entirely. He occasionally grumbled about the lack of streaming services, but he didn't press the issue of getting Netflix back. He had been denied, and the shock of it had clearly resonated. Eleanor, for her part, maintained a quiet distance. She continued with her daily routines, but with a renewed sense of purpose. She started taking long walks around the neighborhood, something she hadn't done regularly since David passed. She reconnected with an old friend, Susan, a retired school teacher who lived a few blocks away. Over coffee on Susan's porch, Eleanor confided in her, detailing the dead weight comment in the Netflix cancellation. Susan listened, her eyes thoughtful. "It's about time, honey," Susan said softly, stirring her coffee. "You've been giving him everything for too long. Sometimes they need to feel the absence." Susan's words resonated deeply. It was not just about the absence of Netflix, but the absence of her unquestioning support. Eleanor began to make a mental list, then a physical one, of all the things she still provided for Mark: his cell phone bill, his car insurance, his share of the utility costs, even the groceries that largely catered to his preferences. It was a staggering amount. She pulled out old bank statements, a dusty ledger from David's office, and began to itemize. The numbers, stark and undeniable, painted a clear picture of her financial burden. She was not just supporting him, she was enabling a lifestyle of perpetual adolescence. She felt a quiet, simmering anger. This was not the future David had envisioned for their son. This was not the independent man she had tried to raise. She remembered David's firm hand on Mark's shoulder, guiding him, teaching him responsibility. She had softened, allowed too much leeway, convinced herself that love meant endless provision. The numbers on the page were a harsh mirror, reflecting her own misplaced devotion. The decision to address the other chords came quickly, fueled by a mixture of indignation and self-preservation. She drafted a polite but firm email to Mark, outlining the new financial expectations. Starting the following month, he would be responsible for his own cell phone bill, car insurance, and a portion of the household utilities. She specified a date by which she expected to see proof of his new arrangements. The email was devoid of emotion, a stark, factual document. She considered a face-to-face conversation, but the email felt more formal, more binding, less prone to emotional manipulation. She sent it late one evening, after Mark had gone to bed, ensuring he would wake up to it. The act felt strangely liberating, like shedding a heavy cloak. The next morning, she woke early, a quiet anticipation building within her. She heard Mark's bedroom door open, then the quiet click of his phone. She waited. The house was silent again, save for the distant chirping of birds. Then a low growl of frustration from his room. She didn't flinch. He emerged from his room, eyes narrowed, clutching his phone like a weapon. "What is this, Mom?" His voice was low, controlled, but laced with menace. "You're cutting off my phone? My car insurance? What kind of mother does that?" Eleanor was making tea, her back to him, her movements calm and deliberate. A mother who believes her 28-year-old son should be financially responsible for himself. "Mark," she replied, pouring the hot water into her mug. She turned, facing him, holding the warm mug in her hands. "This house is not a hotel. These services are not entitlements. You need to stand on your own 2 feet. His face was red, a vein pulsing in his temple. "But I can't afford all that. I barely make enough as it is." His voice cracked with a whine she hadn't heard since his teenage years. "Then you need to find a way to afford it," she stated simply. "A better job, more hours, whatever it takes. That's what adults do." His anger erupted. He shouted, pacing the kitchen, listing all his struggles, all the reasons he couldn't possibly manage. He accused her of abandoning him, of being unloving, of making his life impossible. He brought up David, lamenting how David would never have done this to him. The emotional manipulation was transparent, a desperate attempt to regain control. Eleanor stood firm, listening in silence, her expression unchanged. She allowed him to vent, absorbing the hurtful words without reacting. When he finally exhausted himself, his voice raw, she spoke, her voice still quiet, almost calm. "I have loved you and supported you your entire life, Mark. I continue to do so, by providing you with a roof over your head and food on the table. But my role is not to be your endless ATM. My role is to help you become a responsible adult. And sometimes that means allowing you to face the consequences of your own choices and make your own way." Her words, delivered without anger, seemed to deflate him completely. He had expected a fight, an emotional breakdown, something he could control. Instead, he met a wall of quiet resolve. He didn't respond. He just stood there, breathing heavily, his face contorted in a mixture of anger, frustration, and a dawning realization. He snatched up his keys from the hook by the door and stormed out of the house, the familiar slam of the screen door echoing through the quiet street. This time, The silence he left behind felt different. It was not just absence, but a profound, almost palpable sense of relief. Eleanor took a deep breath, the air in the kitchen feeling lighter, cleaner. She walked over to the calendar hanging on the refrigerator and circled the dates for the new financial responsibilities. She felt a quiet sense of triumph, not vindictive, but resolute. This was not about punishing him. It was about liberating herself. It was about severing the ties that bound her to a pattern of endless sacrifice and unacknowledged worth. The house was her sanctuary again, no longer a shared prison. She still loved her son, but that love was no longer blind. It was a love that demanded respect and self-preservation. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew she was ready. The weeks that followed were a testament to the quiet power of Eleanor's decision. Mark, initially defiant, spent more time out of the house. He found a second part-time job, something at a local coffee shop. He grumbled about it, but he did it. The phone bill, surprisingly, was paid on time, though she never saw proof, only the lack of a disconnection notice. The car insurance, too, seemed to be handled. He was adapting, albeit begrudgingly. The emotional distance between them grew, a chasm of unspoken resentments on his side, and a calm, protective barrier on hers. She noticed small changes in the house. He started cleaning up his own dishes. Sometimes, he didn't leave his clothes strewn in the living room as often. These were small victories, not grand gestures, but they signified a grudging acknowledgement of her new boundaries. She didn't comment on them. She simply observed, maintaining her neutral, firm stance. The silence in the house, once filled with her suppressed anxieties, was now a space for her own thoughts, her own pursuits. She resumed her long-neglected hobbies. Her garden, once a sprawling mess, slowly began to reclaim its order. She spent hours among the roses and hydrangeas, feeling the soil beneath her hands, the sun on her back. It was a restorative process, mirroring the internal work she was doing. She joined a book club at the local library, making new connections, engaging in conversations that had nothing to do with Mark or his needs. She started taking painting classes, something David had encouraged her to do years ago. The blank canvas, initially daunting, became a source of quiet joy, a space for her to express colors and forms that had long been suppressed. These small rituals, these acts of self-care, were profound. They were her reclaiming of self, one quiet moment at a time. She felt herself expanding, blooming, like the flowers in her garden. The dead weight comment, once a source of humiliation, had become a catalyst for her rebirth. It had stripped away the illusion of her indispensable role, forcing her to see herself, not just as a mother, but as an individual with her own needs and desires. One afternoon, Eleanor found an old, faded letter tucked into a rarely used drawer in David's desk. It was from Mark, written when he was 8 years old, a crude drawing of a stick figure family on the front. Inside, scribbled in crayon, it said to the best mom in the world, "I love you." A pang of bittersweet emotion went through her. The boy who wrote that letter was buried somewhere beneath the layers of entitlement and casual cruelty. She carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the drawer. It was a reminder not of what she had lost, but of what she had fought for. She still loved that boy, but she could no longer allow herself to be consumed by the man he had become. Her relationship with Mark had shifted. Fundamentally, it was no longer a symbiotic bond, but a more distant, respectful acknowledgement of two separate individuals. This detachment, though painful at times, was necessary for her survival. She knew Mark might never fully understand her choices, might always carry a resentment, but that was his burden to bear, not hers. The peace in the house was no longer precarious. It was solid, earned. Mark was rarely home now, preferring to spend his time with friends or at work. When he was there, he was quieter, less demanding. The unspoken acknowledgement of her boundaries hung in the air, a silent agreement. She cooked for herself, ate her meals in peace, sometimes at the small breakfast nook, overlooking the garden, sometimes on the patio, enjoying the evening air. She found comfort in the solitude. in the quiet ownership of her space. She had spent decades defining herself through her relationships, first as a wife, then as a mother. Now she was simply Eleanor, a woman in her own home, making her own choices. The transformation was not dramatic, not outwardly visible to anyone but herself, yet it felt profound. She was no longer just responding to the needs of others. She was responding to her own. One evening, about 6 months after the Netflix incident, Eleanor was sitting in the living room, reading, the soft glow of a table lamp illuminating the pages. She heard a quiet knock on the door, then Mark's voice. "Mom, you awake?" It was late, past 10 o'clock. She usually didn't see him at this hour. She put down her book and walked to the door. Mark was standing there, a backpack slung over his shoulder. He looked tired, his eyes a little red-rimmed.
I got my own place, he mumbled.
Not quite looking at her. "Moved in this afternoon. It's a small studio in Raleigh." He shifted his weight, avoiding her gaze. This was it, the final cut. He was leaving the nest. Eleanor felt a wave of complex emotions. Relief, of course, but also a quiet pang of sadness, the kind that comes with the ending of an era. "That's good, Mark," she said, her voice steady. "I'm glad to hear you're taking this step." He nodded, still not meeting her eyes.
Yeah.
"It's small, but it's mine." He paused, then finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Listen, Mom, about everything. The deadweight thing. And everything else." He trailed off, fumbling for words. Eleanor waited. He took a deep breath. "It was a stupid thing to say. I didn't mean it. And thanks for letting me stay here so long. For everything." It wasn't an apology in the traditional sense, not a full reckoning, but it was an acknowledgement. It was enough. "I wish you all the best, Mark," she said, her voice soft, but firm. She didn't offer a hug, didn't make a fuss. She simply acknowledged his words, his new step. He nodded, then turned to leave. As he walked out the door, he hesitated, then turned back. "Oh, and Mom?" She looked at him. "I got my own Netflix account." A faint, almost imperceptible ghost of a smile touched his lips, and then he was gone, the screen door closing softly behind him for the last time. Eleanor stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the taillights of his car disappear down the street. The house was truly quiet now, truly hers. She walked back into the living room, picked up her book, but didn't read. Instead, she sat listening to the silence, a quiet, profound sense of peace settling over her. The battle was over, the cords were cut, and she was finally completely free. She smiled. A small, private smile of contentment. The television screen remained dark.